All righty. Well, welcome to the 2021 Northern Kentucky Restoration Weekend. My name is Christopher Myers, and I'm serving as the moderator for this session. Please use the chat function of Zoom to ask your questions throughout the presentation. And please also let us know through chat if you have any problems hearing or seeing the speaker. Our speakers today are Lindsay Jones and Morgan Graff with Blind Eye Restoration, and they are presenting on wood rot identification and treatment planning. Please, again, use the chat to throw in your questions and comments, and we'll be sharing more information throughout the session. So I'll hand it over to you two.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I am Lindsay Jones, and my co-presenter is Morgan. Oops, okay. There we go. We are Blind Eye Restoration, or two of the team of Blind Eye Restoration. I own Blind Eye. We have been in business since 2016. My background is in historic preservation and construction contracting. I've been in construction since I was probably 12, working with my dad, and just kept going with it and realized that preservation just has so many more benefits to it. So we work on historic architecture and public art features, specializing in not necessarily just historic things, but how materials react to weather, to each other, how they age over time, and how those things can be mitigated, planned for, repaired, using the best practices available to us. Morgan is my right-hand woman. She's been with me for over 3 years now, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan Graff. I've been doing preservation since I was 18. I've loved history and old buildings ever since I was young, working in my parents' old farmhouse. So that's how I kind of got into it. Went and got my bachelor's degree at University of Mary Washington. Did a lot of documentation and paper writing and stuff like that. Realized it wasn't totally my thing, so I decided to go to Belmont College to get more trades experience, where I got my associates. Worked for a different couple construction companies, preservation construction specifically, just to kind of hone in on my skills. And I actually had a supervisor who showed me Lindsay's Instagram page, and somehow I magically moved to Ohio. So found her and bothered her, and now I've been with her for 3 years, as she said. So that's kind of my background, and we've been dealing with different materials ever since, and it's been great.
So today we're obviously talking about wood rot. One of our major specialties, Morgan, is our primary contractor, all things wood, or contractor, carpenter. So the first thing just to note is that wood rot does not just appear. It is the existence of moisture in wood and fungi spores reacting, growing, eating your wood, creating the structural problems. So just so everybody is on the same page, wood is made up of cellulose and lignin. You want to think of the cellulose in wood as the bonding fibers that hold everything together, and the lignin is more of the bulk, the major structure that is made up, that everything is made up. So you think of it in terms of like concrete and steel bars. Steel bars are your cellulose, and your concrete is your lignin. If you just had the lignin, you would just have a bulk, and it's fine. It has kind of its own strength, but when introduced to water, it can kind of fall apart and crumble. The cellulose steel bars help hold everything together, keep everything in a solid contained form. So rot begins with moisture infiltration, like I said, and there's just a number of ways water can get into your house. Obviously, rot doesn't happen just because of moisture, but there are fungi spores all around us. So it's just best to minimize these points of water infiltration as much as we can. Obviously, the first thing anybody thinks of is rain. How do we keep rain out of our houses? Is having a good roof structure. Make sure that water is washing away. It's not coming inside the roof, dripping into the home. Hopefully having a good gutter system and just general drainage away from the house. Unfortunately, that is not the only way that water gets in. If we don't have good flashing around our chimneys, if things aren't capped, we can get water in through the roof regardless of what the condition of your shingles look like. If you don't have good gutters, if you don't have good downspouts, water can just drip directly off of the roof right next to your foundation. And that's where you can actually find water infiltrating in your basement. You get rising damp around your foundation. Or even if without good eaves, you get rain driving against the surface of the house, landing on sills, landing on door thresholds, and just sitting there. If you don't have proper angle away from the windows, away from the doors, if your surface of your house isn't properly painted, water can just grab on, sit, and really just saturate all of the wood surfaces around your home. Another thing to think about actually is also your vegetation. If you have too much groundscaping, landscaping around the foundation of your home, trees overhanging, you can get a lot of buildup of debris, either in your gutters, on your roof, or just bushes against the walls of your house can hold humidity against the surfaces, and that humidity will actually suck into the wall itself, creating another infiltration point for water. So we want to look out for all of these different things. Groundwater coming up, water just coming directly in through the sides, as well as through your roof. And that's just natural water outside of your house. We also have to think about the water that's inside of our homes that we are creating that's causing an issue. Condensation inside of bathrooms and washrooms, laundry rooms, basements. If we have a humid space, we need to make sure that we also have a way of getting it out. So dehumidifiers, bath vents, just some people have humidifiers in their homes, especially in the Midwest during our dry winters. A lot of people like to boil water or like hot steam in their bathrooms. Even if your home, I don't know, there's a lot of breathers. When you wake up in the morning and you've been sleeping in your bedroom, and if it's wintertime, we get a lot of frost inside of single pane windows in the Midwest. And so the best way to mitigate that is having a storm window. Storm windows, also a good way of keeping moisture off of your windowsills. So multiple reasons for that. But yeah, so it's natural causes, the condition of the building envelope that we're in, as well as the way that we use our homes. There are a couple of different types of rot, three to be specific, that we're going to talk about today. Two, the most common that you'll run into, most recognizable, are brown rot and soft rot. Brown rot is a more rapid deterioration of the wood. It's also known as dry rot. Sometimes you won't necessarily recognize it as a rot because it doesn't seem to be as wet, or doesn't hold on to moisture or have like moss growing on it. It just sort of seems to crumble. It shrinks the wood, turns it a deep brown in color. You get small cube-shaped bits. It does spread rapidly. So like I said, there's fungi in there. It's actually eating away at the cellulose and eating the fibers of your wood so that it's falling apart. Soft rot is a little bit slower moving, but similar in the fact that it eats the cellulose, and typically found it in a honeycomb appearance, slightly different, but still both pretty common and similar. Ooh, come on. We also have the less common white rot, obviously very visibly recognizable as a fungus. It is slower moving, and it tends to go for the lignin, the bulk. So if you were to clean off the white fungus and mitigate the moisture issue, you might find that there's still stable wood underneath because the cellulose, those bonding fibers, are still present, holding the wood together. It'll just look a little crummier. Again, it's a chance, but it is, again, a wood rot issue. And so it's something that you should be careful that it is not spongy or totally eaten away to the core, that there is bonding fibers and a strong wood substrate still there underneath the rot. Likely areas where you'll find the wood rot, like Similar to my previous slide, we're talking about where the wood or the water enters the home. Those are going to be the spots where you're going to find rot. You're going to find it in your windowsills, at the bottoms of your doors, anything to the exterior. You're going to find it in siding, on your wood decks. You'll also find it in basements, and hopefully not in your major structural beams. Floors in wet spaces, specifically around your toilets, showers, sinks, and anywhere where you find that you've got a lot of water, either that you are using inside your home, or if you don't have gutters, you'll be able to see it when it's raining. You have to go out and look, potentially running down the side of the house, figuring out which side of the house gets the most weather. Often that side will get the driving rain, and you'll potentially be getting water through into the walls in those spaces. So keeping, once in a while, go outside your house when it's raining and just check and see how water is coming off of your building. So ways to look for rot and identify where it is. As the picture illustrates, oftentimes take a screwdriver, a pen, a knife, pickaxe is not the right word, ice pick, and you just stick it right in. That's obviously you've got wood rot there. You're looking for an uneven texture behind painted surfaces, kind of a squishy, spongy texture, sometimes a dry crumbling. If it's painted or stained, you'll see a discoloration, a tide line, a stain. Couple of different ways of seeing it. Again, we know that the cellulose is the important part of the wood, and we're going to make sure that it's still solid. Sometimes the lignin can be a little bit eaten away. As long as we stop the water infiltration and get everything kind of cleaned up, it should stop the rot. But the idea is that, so you could find a spot that had rot and maybe has stopped. So if it's still strong, it may be an instance that had rot. It is not a continuing rot issue. So the moisture level is also something to be considered. Even if it's not wet at the moment, check back and make sure it's not continuously getting water. And now I will hand it over to Morgan to talk about the different ways that we treat wood rot and the products we use.
Thank you, Lindsay. Obviously, the slide is, can this be fixed? So that's what I'll be talking about today. And of course it can. Wood rot can be fixed. It's either epoxy resin products or wood replacement. So I will talk about epoxies and then get into wood replacement after. Just some quick info about epoxies, just to give a general idea about it. They're petroleum based, which means they're plastic based. They're a little bit more durable than some of the natural materials that we use. It's a two-part system consisting of a hardener and resin. This can often have different ratios depending on what product you're using, so that's just something to keep in mind. It's an exothermic product, which means that it creates heat when they react together. So when you mix it, it creates heat for it to cure and give its bonding agent. It works as consolidants and fillers, and I will list those later. It was actually incorporated into construction, obviously, as we see today, but aerospace and electronics around the world since the 1930s. A little history of epoxy, just to give another basis for it. It was actually created in 1934 by a German researcher named Paul Schlack. He patented the formula of epoxy resin. Didn't quite make it yet, but he, patented the formula and found it. It's a group of rigid polymers with mechanical properties with resistance to temperature and corrosion. 4 years later, though, Pierre Caston and Sylvain Greenlee finalized the research to actually make the epoxy product. And then in 1957, James Krieg used the epoxy for historic ruins and repairs in Tucson, Arizona. So that was kind of the first use for historic repairs that we see, but it didn't become prevalent until 1970s, where preservation professionals have been using it pretty much daily. We do. They began using the epoxy as a consolidant, structural adhesive, and structural gap filling. Next slide. As I listed, the consolidant, the use of epoxy consolidant is epoxy resin's purpose is to fill the voids in the cellulose that has been damaged by the rot, or the lignin that the timber to restore it to its natural, structural strength, mechanical property. It reinforces the remaining wood fiber that Lindsay was talking about was rotting or, degrading, falling apart earlier. Prior to epoxy resins, people were using different, more natural products like animal glue, molten wax, drying oil, and natural resins, which helped kind of protect the surface of the wood, but obviously over time can cause rot and issues if it's not prepared within the internal structure of the wood. Nice thing about the epoxy consolidants, they have low shrinkage, controllable curing mechanism, durable, they're reversible too, actually, which is really great. Low viscosity, low toxicity, retains paint, and has adjustable strength properties, depending on what product you're using. Erica Schaefer, sorry, come back. Sorry, I have one more tidbit, I guess, for consolidants. Erica Schaefer was a Canadian chemist who was introduced to the product back in 1971. She began testing the low viscosity of the consolidant because it's a more liquid-based epoxy, which I did not mention, so I apologize. It's more liquid-based, which means it penetrates the wood better and internal wood. But she concluded that depending on the size of the decayed area and the mix that she used, that the consolidant was attained, that it was working depending on how much she made and how much she applied to the piece. So as we use today, it works, it sinks into the wood, it absorbs into the wood. It gives it an extra structural strength, to say. Next slide. The next use is the structural adhesive. Epoxy is used in this instance to repair the timber if it's too far gone. This concept means that new wood can be structurally adhered to existing member if needed. If it's been too rotted, just needs to be replaced. As you can see in the image, someone used a different piece of wood to adhere to part of this window to make it more structurally sound again. In 1960s, Paul Stooms, structural engineer, used the West System product originally, which I will discuss later. He began testing the product on the end of rotten structural timbers with addition of structural steel beams to give the wood back to its structural strength. But later, a man named Tivadar Sabo developed a method which we use presently in preservation, in which a dado cut is made into the decayed wood. A new piece of wood is then inserted and adhered to the remaining timber with epoxy. This in turn increases the tensile strength of the diminishing rot piece. The method involves removing the existing rotted timber veneer and adhering it to new structural timber, thus restores the structural stability of the members and to keep the historical significance if that is necessary in a project. And then the last option for your epoxy will be the structural gap filling adhesive. It replaces the rotten punky wood and it reinforces with high tensile strength and it mimics the look of the structure of wood. As you can see in the image here, it's back to its dimensional lumber. Before you do the gap filling adhesive, it's advised to use the consolidant after you remove the rotten wood from the piece. So it can obviously consolidate the rot and it can strengthen the wood again before you add the new structural gap filling epoxy to it. And now different products that we use on the market in preservation. Abitron is a brand that we use frequently on our projects. It is the most frequent epoxy used by a lot of preservation professionals. It was originally founded in 1959 and it dealt with IT products, which is hilarious to me, but kind of got into the building restoration in the 1980s. So they've been doing it ever since. They make wood products, concrete products, and metal products as well. We have used those, but obviously we'll be addressing the wood epoxies during this time. For the wood products, we recommend the liquid wood and the wood epox, as you can see in this image. They are both 1-to-1 ratio, which means you make the same size, make the same volume, mix it together, and that's how they react with each other. It's a part A and B. The liquid wood is used as a consolidant, as stated earlier, and it's also a structural adhesive as well. mostly for the wood epox, for it to adhere better to the wood if you're doing the structural gap filling. It strengthens the punky rotting wood as well. For that mixture, you'll do the 1-to-1. You'll mix it in a separate container until it kind of gets this bubbly consistency, and then it's mixed perfectly and it'll react well. If it doesn't, it will not harden the wood and it will kind of make it a sticky texture, and that's when you know that your ratio is a little bit off. So just FYI, if you use the product. This can be applied with a brush, or if there's further damage to the piece, like the structural integrity of the piece has been compromised, obviously, you can drill holes into the damaged areas and then apply the epoxy with a syringe. So you can beef and strengthen up the internals of, I guess, the cellulose of the wood piece in the member. Wood epox is a replacement compound, so it's a filler. The filler is resins and additives that are added into it to give it a kind of putty texture. So it's kind of like, as I've said, adult Play-Doh for wood epox. So for that, you just get the same size putty balls and then you just mix them together until it turns into a cream color. And that's when you know it has the right consistency. If you do not mix your putty together until it reaches that cream color, it will not cure properly. It will not give the same wood effect or mimic the same wood structure that we're trying to replace. It is ideal for filling voids in the wood. If you want to go to the next slide, Lindsay, for that. Thank you. Yeah, this image shows the consolidant being applied first after the rot has been removed, and then the wood epox has been applied to the area as the white cream color, as I discussed earlier. But it's ideal for filling voids in the wood, checks and splits from weathering and animal damage by chance. The rot, creates the checking in the sills or stiles, and that can be filled with the epoxy, and it will give it back its structural surface. It also can be, the consolidant can be added to the putty to give it a more spreadable consistency. The wood putty you can like place it and shape it and mold it. It's really easily moldable depending on what you're replacing. So you can kind of mimic the shape that you need to remake.
Very
But if you're
sculptural.
trying to fill in like those checks that I was saying earlier, you can kind of make it a little bit more spreadable consistency. And that is for Abitron. Our next product is West System. It was made by the Guggen brothers in 1958. It was originally made for boat builders, which is interesting. So a lot of these epoxies have started out with something else, but preservationists have seen the benefits of these epoxies and have been using it for their projects since. In 1992, the company evolved from boat construction to encompass the types of building restoration repairs seen with the epoxy. This ratio is different. It's a 5-to-1. So you have to make sure when you're mixing this product that it's a 5-to-1 ratio. It cures within 24 hours, like most epoxies. Same with the Abitron, which I did not mention. It has a liquid consolidant, which is a little bit more viscous than the Abitron, but it penetrates the wood just as well as the liquid wood. But it has a high tensile strength. And I would actually recommend this product as more of a structural adhesive. It worked a lot better, bonding two different types of wood together and keeping that as one single piece. It can also be used as a structural gap filling. So there's little microfibers that come with this product that you just mix in with the liquid as well to make it a more like peanut butter consistency, to make it a structural gap filling. It is then applied with a putty knife. Unlike the Abitron, it needs to be applied with a putty knife because it's super sticky. Do not want that. Abitron putty is obviously like clay shape and moldable, so you can do that with your hands. It has a tougher curing surface and not as easily sandable as the Abitron, but a strong material though, to say the least. Next product is PC products. This is kind of a little bit more of an affordable product on the market. It comes in the liquid wood hardener, is the PC wood hardener petrifier, and the PC wood putty. So it has the consolidant and it has the structural gap filling products on the market. PC, known as protective coating, was founded in 1954 by John Lack. They actually made concrete products before, but then decided to get to the wood product industry after realizing its benefit for the preservation community. The PC Woody is a 2-part putty, 1-to-1, same thing like the Abatron. This stuff is mixed with a putty knife on just a flat board or surface. So you have to mix it with a putty knife and apply with a putty knife. Not as easily hands-on moldable as Abatron, but works just as effectively. It's good for check filling and for little hole filling, not for large gap filling though. I will say that. And it's not as easily moldable. The PC petrifier is used as the consolidator, as I said. It does penetrate the wood pretty well, not as well as the other products I have listed, but it's already mixed, which is the nice part. So you just kind of pour and paint it on your surface where you need it. But it's a good, easy solution for some wood rot that you might have around the house if you do not have the West system or the Abatron. The next product is the Art epoxy, which is advanced repair technology. Lindsay and I always want to call it, what do we always call it? Art something.
I forget what it's called because we call it the Art epoxy, and then I can't find it to buy it because I'm looking up Art epoxy.
It just comes with art products all the time, but it's advanced repair technology. It's a part A and B. It comes in a designated dispenser, as you can see in the image, which is nice so you don't have to do the mixed ratio. Obviously, it's not a 1-to-1. It's probably a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, but it already comes with the tube, so you don't have to worry about it. So that's the nice thing about this product. It's a structural adhesive. It's structural gap filling adhesive. It actually comes with the consolidant pre-primer as well, which is a 3-to-1. I forget that one. 3-to-1. But it has great compression and tensile strength. It holds up to 14,000 PSI. Like it's a bad boy of epoxies. It's fantastic. They've used this a lot on Old House for a couple of different projects, of course. Yeah, it's one of its strongest, it's over the compression strength of the strongest hardwoods, such as maple and walnut. So it's even harder than those hardwoods. So that's pretty impressive. It is the ability to hold its shape. It doesn't slump or shrink, so it's easy to kind of tool. You'll have to tool it with a putty knife. You can't use your hands, another very sticky product, but easily moldable with your putty knife if you need it to be. It mimics the flexible nature and will expand and contract like wood. Most of these products do. That's why they work so well, because they mimic the wood that they are replacing.
That's why Bondo gets such a bad rap. People don't want to put epoxies in wood because they're like, it doesn't react, you'll get water behind it. If you're using a consolidant and a good wood epoxy like these that we're showing you, they should expand and contract with the wood because they're designed to expand and contract with the wood specifically. We don't necessarily recommend this product to repair all of your major structural beams. Don't do that. But it is really nice that it's sculpting, even though you have to use a putty knife. This was one of my first epoxies that I really loved, and we keep using it even though it's not the cheapest.
It's okay. It's good for structural though. We use it a lot for joint repairs on like our windows or doors. If a piece is completely gone and the mortise, which holds the tenon, which is the joint for the window, if that's completely gone, we glue up a new piece of wood with the Art epoxy, and it's just like a whole new piece, and it's fantastic. I like this product as well. I didn't know about it until I started working with Lindsay, so it's been really great to use. And yeah, Bondo is not recommended. Bondo is used mostly. Yes.
I'll jump in. We have a question in the chat. Someone is asking, can you shape this product after it's cured?
You can. It won't be with a putty knife. It'll be with like a scraper or sandpaper or like a chisel. So yeah, we'll get the basic shape that we need. And it's mostly for any product that you use for epoxy. Like you'll get your basic shape. And sometimes you want to make it a little bit larger than like your finished piece that you want. So you can kind of like sand it down and smooth it out the way that you want it to be. So yeah, you can use like a scraper blade, an X-Acto knife, chisel, or anything like that, and kind of just sculpt the shape that you need. I've used it for molding pieces and stuff like that. So I'll get the general like profile that I need, and then I'll go back with some sandpaper or scraper just to get the more overall shape that I want to finish. So
Not as easy to shape as the Abitron wood epox, but easier than West System.
yes, exactly. All of them have their pros and cons, obviously. But yeah, Abitron is very easily shapeable in comparison. Yeah, so that is kind of it for epoxies. Now we're on to wood replacement in general. So that's the other option. As defined, a wood Dutchman is an inset of wood patch to repair the wood. You basically cut out a piece of wood, as you can see from these images, and replace it with the newly shaped piece of wood that you're choosing. For wood replacement in Dutchmans, you want to replace in kind of meaning the same type of wood. You wanted to get rid of the rot, obviously, and get down to sound wood before you replace it with a wood new Dutchman.
Morgan, we had one quick question back on art epox. Someone is asking, what is the shelf life of art epoxy?
It has a longer shelf life. Lindsay, do you remember?
I think technically they, legally they say in order to protect themselves is probably no more than a year. We use it almost as soon as we buy it. But I think back when I was just using it on my own more sparingly, easily a year, as long as you keep it well capped. It comes with a really great, so the double tube has these little insertable caps on either tube, and then there's another plastic cap, and then there's a screw-on lid. So it gets pretty well sealed in there. So as long as you've got it really closed up tight, honestly, you'll have a harder time breaking back into it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't really worry about it
No.
running out on you.
Definitely
You really need to use it.
And I'll give you, oh, sorry.
No, you're good, Chris. You're good.
I'll give you one more question we got on epoxies. Someone is asking if the epoxies will adhere to wax or if they can use wax paper, wax coating as a form to pour the epoxy into.
You can use a form. Yeah. I don't know if you want to take that, Lindsay, or not.
Oh, so epoxies, if it's a very smooth surface, like plastic, or like we often use putty knives for applying these things, I would say be very careful. Probably a spray release oil or a wax paper probably wouldn't. I hate to say yes and then ruin something, but like Morgan said, you kind of want to oversize your objects anyway. So wax paper might be a good option to use if you're trying to create the basis of a form, because then even if it does stick, you're going to go underneath that and just kind of like sand the surface regardless. We tend to find our putty knives, after a while, it'll stick to it, and you just can't keep reusing them unless you've cleaned them super well. But in a thin layer, like if we have bendable plastic, it'll pop off because it'll have more tensile strength in that flexible plastic. So if it's a smooth, untextured surface that you can kind of peel away from it, that's your best bet.
Yeah. We sometimes use plastic or blue tape or duct tape as like a barrier between. So if we're doing like a sill work for an evening, it has to sit for 24 hours, but we have to close the window. Obviously, if you close the bare wood, wood window and rail onto the epoxy on the sill, it's gonna adhere. it's gonna bond together. So sometimes we use like tape on top of on the bottom rail of the window, and it breaks that bond. It still sticks a little bit, but for the 24 hours for us to come back and redo it, it gives the barrier for it not to adhere together. So it would work, but there still might be the issue of it sticking potentially to the wax paper, as like Lindsay was saying. But it, depending on like what time you get back to it, it might not bond completely. So just if that helps. All right. Any more epoxy questions before we move on to the?
That's all we have in the chat at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. Then we'll get on to real wood and we'll talk about that and see if there's anything after. Yeah. So that's wood Dutchman. I have a couple more slides about wood Dutchman as well. How to Dutchman, not to be a Dutchman, how to Dutchman. The damaged areas affect the mechanics for some of the pieces. As you can see with this window, the joint is completely gone. So the mortise and tenon are gone. That needs to be fixed so the window can function properly again and have its mechanical strength. So if it's that kind of issue, that's kind of when a Dutchman is recommended. You could use epoxy, but it's just such a large hole to fill. Lindsay will kind of go more into that later. So I'm just going to talk about how you would do a Dutchman specifically. So you remove the damaged area of wood. So you'll kind of scrape and prod to make sure that all the loose flaking wood is gone, all the rot is gone from that piece. And then you'll reach sound wood, hopefully eventually. But once you reach the sound wood, you will cut your piece. So you will cut it using an X-Acto knife, a saw, a chisel, so you kind of can get a shape, a flat shape surface for you to bond your new piece of wood to. Because obviously the image that you have here, that'd be a little bit hard to match with wood. So you want to kind of like cut it out and shape it to the way that you want it to be. As in the image below, you know, they kind of bevel cut it, miter cut it, so it'd sit into the piece a little bit better. But use the existing wood style as kind of a tenon to glue those pieces together. So after you chisel, hammer, X-Acto knife, or cut your piece out of the damaged area, you'll actually make your shape of the new replacement wood to match what you have cut out. And you can do it with like a table saw, you know, chop saw, anything like that, jigsaw, any of the saws. You use those, and then you'll make your piece, and then you'll fill it into the area that you cut into the damaged area. You can just, depending on the piece, just nail it or screw it in, but I would not recommend that entirely. I would use either wood glue or the epoxies to really adhere, just to give it more of a flush, gap filling surface. So glue or epoxies if necessary. If it doesn't fit tight, you want to make sure the fit is very tight. You can like file it down or sand it down, either the piece that you've remade or the cutout that you made for the damaged area. Okay, and then the next is kind of about the wood that you'll use.
I'll just mention that the screw and nail thing, we don't recommend it because the same thing with like Bondo, it doesn't have the same expansion contraction rate as the wood. And it can also have a different condensation attraction because of the way that it reacts to heat and cold. It attracts more condensation, which can cause rusting, and it can just really eat a hole in your wood when you're really trying to bond things together, which is why we recommend more glue or epoxy.
And if screws used, stainless steel, just FYI, everybody.
You're gonna do it.
Oh no.
What?
Uh-oh, did we lose Morgan?
Here I am. I'm here. Oh, shoot. There she is.
Okay.
Morgan?
Who's screen? Is me? Is my internet? Okay, is my internet screwed up? I wasn't sure. Who is it? Never know with these things. Okay, so next slide about Dutchman's, just kind of things to note about your replacement piece or your repair. When replacing damaged areas, you must find, so in kind, I mean the same type of wood or the same species is recommended. So you have your different types, which is softwood and hardwood. Here's kind of a chart showing the like biological makeup of hardwood and softwood. As you can see, they're a little bit different. Obviously, they have their growth rings and things like that. But you can see a kind of a more consistent, tighter bond with the hardwood. That's why it makes it so hardy. Unlike the softwood, the growth rings are a little bit different and a little bit more inconsistent, but either one is fine depending on what you're using, but it's just recommended to use in kind for what you're replacing. So example, if you have an old growth pine window, you'll replace with pine or like a softwood like poplar or something like that. Softwoods and hardwoods react differently to exterior temperatures and exterior use in general. So yeah, so they'll react differently. So if you have a softwood, they're going to react the same, and you're not going to have any issues. And hardwood, same thing. Example though, if you are using maybe a different type of hardwood, we have a client over in Bexley that we had to do a sill Dutchman repair to for a couple of her sills. Her original sills and exterior trim were red oak, but we decided to use white oak instead. So same kind of species family and same type, but not the same wood exactly. White oak is kind of a little bit more durable to exterior use than red oak. So we decided to use that instead. And also it helps mitigate from bugs as well from white oak, just a side tip. But we decided to use white oak instead of red oak, but it's still going to have the same expansion contraction effect. So it's going to react the same in the exterior temperature and use. So that's just something to note for hardwood and softwood. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Lindsay?
Oh, I'd say especially if you're painting, the specific species isn't as big of a deal. It's more when you're staining, when you're looking at the color of the wood, the graining. And would you say the difference between softwood and hardwood, in that density, we're talking about cellulose and lignin again, where there's more density of cellulose. So when you have an issue with rot, and usually the soft rot or brown rot, and they're eating the cellulose, you still, even when you have that rot in a hardwood, it stands up to a little bit better because there's so much more of it and it's so much more dense.
Thanks,
man. Yeah, just a thought. We should have put it up earlier.
All right, so how to prevent future problems is obviously we've solved our issues with epoxy or wood replacement, or that we've figured out kind of where the issues are coming from. So how to prevent future problems from happening after we've done our repairs and mitigate the problem. So you'll seal all cracks around your exterior doors and windows with caulking. That's always recommended, because if you have a crack that's open, water is going to get in eventually, and it's going to do the same thing that you just repaired. So really good to keep up with your caulking maintenance on your exterior trim and things like that. If you do have old hardened caulking, then you definitely want to remove it and replace it. It's not serving its purpose anymore. It's not doing what it was meant to do originally. Like, it's past its prime time and it needs to be replaced. You have to clean your gutters regularly. So at least twice a year is definitely recommended. And it's during spring and fall. Yeah, spring and fall is when your recommended times are. That can lead to water running off the backs of your downspouts, as Lindsay was saying earlier, and down the side of your home, which is going to cause issues to either rush into any open cracks or voids in your house. You'll want to add a covered entryway over your doors, potentially. Like, don't have to, but of course you want to make sure there's no splashback on the bottom rail of your doors from your from maybe like your concrete pad or patio or whatever you have out front. Use a dehumidifier in the basement or in any room of the house subject to high humidity. So of course, some river rot, as we saw, occurs in the basement. So if you have a dehumidifier down there, you're not going to have as much humidity and water accumulation for the spores to grow on your wood. You'll need to install an exhaust fans in your bathroom so the condensation issue can be resolved. So you're not going to have your steamy showers. The steam will leave the building and won't cause any issues to the exterior of your windows or doors or anything like that.
Don't vent into your attic.
Yeah, don't vent into your attic. Yeah. You've got that stuff. You had that stuff. And repaint exterior windows. Siding if paint is cracking, peeling, and that is definitely the biggest recommendation. Is if your paint is peeling and your paint is cracking, scrape it down, put some paint on top of it, because if not, that leads to a lot of water accumulating in those areas that can lead to your siding, getting damaged or rotten, or your fascia boards. There's wood everywhere, wood on your masonry buildings and wood on your, obviously, wood buildings, but wood is used in a lot of areas of homes. So you just have to make sure that those, the painting maintenance is done. 20 years, 10 years, what's the recommended? 10?
Like 7 years.
I was gonna say 20 sounds too much. It's like 7
If
or
you've done a really, really good prep and you've scraped everything smooth and sanded and primed and done like your multiple coats of paint and back brushed, you can last 10, maybe 15 years if you use a really good job. Average painter though, like if you have a wood house, I'd say almost go around and touch up little things once a year, and like the big job probably needs to be done at least every 10 years. Yeah, paint is a big issue. We talk about paint a lot in preservation. You know, we don't paint masonry buildings because paint always fails and water gets inside of it. It's the same thing with wood. But we don't talk about it as much because it's sort of assumed that people know, I guess, or putting paint on a wood building makes sense because you want it to be on a wood building because we need that protective layer. But we do have to address the fact that it does crack and fail, and especially depending on the different products you're using can crack and you won't even notice, and that it'll just still be like this barrier that holds water in there, and it's like a little water balloon against your house. So you have to be very mindful that you're maintaining those painted surfaces to make sure that that's not happening. So obviously we've talked about epoxy, we've talked about wood dutchman, we've talked about all the ways you should keep water out, where to look for it, how to identify your rot, but when you're actually doing the treatment, which ones are we recommending for different projects? So your epoxy fills, for us, because we do a lot of finish work, my primary recommendation is anything that you're going to paint, epoxy's basically fine. If you're not painting it, go with a wood dutchman, because it is impossible to hide epoxy behind stain unless you are doing a decorative painting before finishing and making sure that you use all the proper products. And that's a whole other training talk. Epoxy is great for doing these fills where we just need to stabilize, strengthen pieces of an overall larger wood piece that is in okay shape, but it needs, you know, that extra something to fill in rot or fill in spots where a little bit of profile has been damaged. We get a lot of squirrel damaged windows actually. Usually people's attics, or you know, somewhere where a squirrel somehow got in, probably open roof fascia, something like that, and couldn't get out. And just, I have the same issue with birds in my attic. Sometimes they just like throw themselves at the window, the nearest window, and just like chew at it and try to get out. It's not a water damage issue, so it's very easy to just keep the wood where it is, the wood that's existing as it is, because it's still structural, it's still fine, and we can do a little bit of consolidant to make sure that the loose fibers are contained, and then an epoxy fill, which just smooth it out real fast. If it is a wood damage or water damage with fungus and rot and all of that, the same type of window, sometimes the structural members are a little bit more difficult. They're a little looser, a little wonkier, just because it seeps in and you have to think about the structure of the piece. If it's small or large, we tend to go on a 50-50 percentage. A lot of conservators or, you know, window restorers will talk about the amount of wood that's left over that's still good, and not trying to waste historic fabric or put more material into the landfill if you don't have to. We can keep the original.
Yeah, sorry.
The what?
Just more of like a Secretary of Interior standards as well. It's just
yeah. But we, you know, there's also a balance of epoxy is not the cheapest thing. And if you're really creating a large area, you have to think about the volume of epoxy you're using, how well it holds its shape if you're using some of the different products. So these column bases and the photo on the right, it looks like they used a couple of different products around the profile, kind of in the middle round bit of the base. It looks like they've used something like wood epox, which they can kind of wipe in, smooth, sand, and you could have used a couple of different things there because it's more of a concave. You don't have to worry about it sagging. Down in the square base corner, it looks like they use something like art epoxy, where they were able to sculpt it and sand it it looks a little bit clearer. Obviously doesn't take stain very well. You can add wood fibers to it to make it look more dense. I've used it in floor repairs where knots fell out, and you can add a mineral pigment and wood dust, wood, what's the word I'm thinking of? Sawdust. You can add sawdust and mineral pigment to an art epoxy or to Abitron to color it, to kind of help hide it. But that is much more structural. There at the corner, it's holding its shape, it's not slumping. You can paint over it, you won't notice it. The picture on the left is like a wood epox, kind of almost looks like a wood filler. But again, like I said, hard to cover that with a stain and not see it. So this would be a surface that I would paint. When it comes to a wood Dutchman fill, there are sort of similar reasons, structural and visual. Visually, if you're working on a stained surface, like I said, and you don't want to see the epoxy, a lot of people will do a very precise wood Dutchman fill. You try to go with wood that's in kind, a matching species with grain that's going in the similar pattern to kind of disguise that it is a patch. Really hard to disguise a Dutchman patch in general. We actually, I kind of mentioned, we do a decorative painting where we mimic the grain, but we'll still try to use wood Dutchmans like this and just sort of like touch it up around the edges to try and match the two, the original wood and the Dutchman, to make the graining look like they're coming into each other. But it is much easier for a larger area to do a wood Dutchman on a nice wood finish, do a stain over it that blends the color for a surface area, especially in veneers. You'll see a lot of this wood that has a nice wood finish. It's not just a pine or something. On the right hand side, you see we have a wood Dutchman on a sill, and this is one of those areas where, you know, it's a really large fill. The area surrounding it is all going to be painted, but we find that it's easier. We don't have to wait 24 hours. We're usually on site. It's structural. It'll bond to the rest of it. It'll expand and contract appropriately, and we're using an appropriate species to fit in there. The curing time is a big deal. The ability to just quickly cut and shape something that doesn't have a lot of fancy profiles. We don't really have to sand it down. It's not a complex cut. We can just put it in there and make it stable and complete again. And I think that's about it for us. If anybody has any more questions, otherwise I've prepared a couple of things thinking about past projects that we've done to talk to Morgan about.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Morgan. For everyone, I just put their website into the chat, so be sure to check them out. We've got about 60 seconds left until we actually need to take a short break, but that was fantastic information. One thing that I'd ask you to share, well, we're kind of out of time, but I was really interested to hear more about how these products are accessible for amateurs, you know, folks who are just getting started, how you can give them some encouragement. Maybe, I don't know if you'd recommend YouTube videos or some other sources, maybe you give classes, but how to make this accessible for the average person that sees something and wants to try their hand at fixing it.
Yeah, well, my first thing is always try what's most available to you first. Just don't necessarily buy the thing that costs the most. Just, you know, if it's out there, it works. It may not work the best of all the things. Like PC Putty is a great product. Like she said, we can't use it on the bigger fills. It's not quite as sculptural, but it does a great job filling the flats. And it's available at your local hardware store, or at Lowe's at least. And there's, you know, things like that. If you can find it, use it, practice on something. We have actually mocked up a piece of wood in our own shop with the different epoxy products to kind of see what they look like, how they harden, how you're able to finish them, how the consolidants react differently of the different products. And I don't want you to go out and buy all of the products, but if you ever have any questions, we're available on Instagram, Facebook, and we do teach classes if that's ever an interest anybody wants to learn more about. We usually talk about it in our window restoration workshops. And there are always YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Well,
Real quick note, sorry, Chris, just for
Sure.
so West Systems is actually sold at Woodworks over on the east side of town. So you can buy West Systems there, so you can actually go in store and look at it. And Apertron we normally get off of Amazon. So so just FYI for anyone who wants to buy those products. That's my tidbit. Sorry.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for participating in wood rot identification and treatment planning. We're going to have a short break now before our next sessions, which are repairing brick, repointing masonry by David Lamb, or how to research your house and the people who live there by Bev and Jim McPhail. So thank you again, Lindsay and Morgan. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for everyone coming in.